Now the next thing is clarity, and clarity is similar to contrast except that it deals with the mid-range tonal values in the image. So I'm going to dial it up just a little bit to add some detail in the mid-range tones. So you'll notice that in the statue areas, we're starting to see a little bit more detail. You can be a bit more heavy-handed with clarity than you can with contrast. And structure adds more detail to the fine detail areas like these parts of the statue. So now let's move on to saturation. I typically do saturation near the end of my processing on an image. I do this because many of the other sliders will change the depth of color in the image, and so it doesn't make sense to address saturation until the end or near the end of processing. So let's go over to saturation. I'm going to slide it up to a little bit higher setting than I would typically use, just so that you can see it more readily. And another trick I want to show you is that if you have a slider, you can reset it to 0 temporarily by going over to the name, left clicking and holding, let up, and it moves it back to the original setting. So now let's move on to vignetting. Vignetting is typically used to draw the eye of the viewer to a particular place in a photograph. In this case, I want you to be looking more in the center of the photograph, so I'm going to add a vignette around the outer edge. Let me go ahead and add some vignette so that you can see the vignette itself. If I drag to the right, the vignette is white. If I drag to the left, the vignette is black. I want to use the black vignette. I'm going to drag it all the way to the left just to show you what these look like. So elliptical on crop looks like that. Circular looks more like that. It's subtler in this square photograph, and I prefer that. So now with the circular set, I'm going to drag the vignette back so that it's just darkening the outer edges slightly, drawing the eye towards the center. And again, I can put my cursor on the amount slider, left click and hold, and you can see the before and after. It's a subtle amount, but it does draw the eye towards the brighter place in the photograph, which is near the center. So now with vignette set, I am going to come back up to exposure and take a look at brightness and see whether I need to play with that a little bit. I'm going to just bring it up there and take a look at contrast, see if I want to add just a touch more contrast. So now let's take a look at the last step of this process, and that's sharpening. And to do that, we're going to go to the Details tool tab, the one with the little magnifying glass, and we're going to show the focus section as well. And here, this lets me drag around in the image, so I get a close-up of parts of the image, and then I keep the full view here on the right. Now, sharpening could be a whole video in itself, and if you want more details about the amount, radius, threshold, and halo suppression, click on the little question mark here for online help, and that'll take you to the overview of that process with detailed information about sharpening. Adjusting sharpening is the page that you want to go to for details around what sharpening does, what radius does, and threshold. So now let's take a look at the sliders and sharpening. If I select the amount slider and drag it to the right, you can see pretty quickly the sharpening becomes too much. If I drag it to the left, it becomes not sharp enough. If I double click on the chiclet in the slider, that'll reset it back to the default setting. Now, 180 is the default that Capture One uses, and oftentimes I find that that's plenty, and adjusting the radius slightly can do a lot. But what I want you to do in your exploration is to take and change each of them and see how they look. Now, the challenge with sharpening is we don't want too much and we don't want too little. So you're going to have to try it and explore it. In this video, we're not going to go into threshold or halo suppression. Again, take a look at that help page for more details on that. So those are some of the basic tools that you can use for editing your photograph in Capture One Pro 20. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. Thanks for watching.